So in this video, I'll teach you how to react to the Carlsbad pawn structure minority attack. And there are actually two responses that are kind of similar, but also not similar, that I'm going to teach you in this video. So we get a normal Carlsbad pawn structure again. And here in this position, black plays knight to f8, we get pawn to h3 and g6. And again, I told you before that black is trying to trade off this dark square bishop, which is why g6 is a good move. And after g6, we can, black here tries to prepare the bishop f5 move with knight e6, knight g7, and then tries to like trade off the bishops there, okay? That's basically what they try to do. And now here we follow the normal minority attack plan as white rook a to b1. And now knight e6, as I told you, the bishop is attacked, so the bishop goes to h6. Now knight g7, and I told you this is the plan. Pawn to b4, and now bishop, no, a6 first to prevent b5 immediately, and now pawn to a4. Right, that's basically the minority attack. Again, knight f4, knight c5 is also an opportunity, but this is the basic minority attack. And now bishop to f5. This is exactly what you're supposed to do. What you're supposed to do as the black pieces here. If bishop takes g7, then first there will be this in-between Zwischenzug here. But we get knight to e5, rook to c8, and now we get bishop takes g7, and now we get the bishop taking on d3, trading itself off, and we get this position. And here, you can, if you want to already play pawn to b5, but you have to be careful, right? You have to be careful. So rook to b3 first, and now pawn to b5. Black wants to play rook to b3 first, so that if white wants to play rook to b4 first, that if this, after this capture, this guy here is protected once more. But actually, even though that's protected once more, it's not that good. Because in this particular position, with the rook on c8, you have to remember this, right? This reaction to the minority attack is always good if the rook is on c8, or often good if the rook is on c8. C takes b5, c takes b5, and a5. That's basically the idea. You push here. Now, you could argue this is weak, but it doesn't really matter. You push here, and what you have to check if you want to play this, obviously the rooks should be here, that b6 is basically not possible. And in this position, b6 is not possible because knight to e4, and there is a pin on the queen. And after queen to b2, already here the threat is, let's say we don't do nothing, the threat here is a5, which would remove the white rook here from the defense. So you have to be quite careful here, which is why queen to b2 is played. And now we would have this trade, and now the b6 pawn would fall. So you have to check if b6 is playable, and in this particular position it's not. And after the queen moves out of the way first, we play b6 ourselves. And that is now a very, very strong position, because now we have this protected passed pawn on a5, and in every single endgame, that is going to be our big advantage, right? And now white really asks themselves, okay, why did I even play this weird minority attack? Knight to a4, and the rook already comes to c4, and now you see rook, the white pieces have to defend themselves passive. Here, this is really, really stupid. Now the knight comes to e4, and black is the only one with play. Black is the only one with play, and you already see it's minus 1.5, right? Now f3, and that is a huge mistake. That is a huge mistake. f3. You wanted to get rid of this knight here in the center. This is understandable, but this is just too weakening of all of these squares here, of the dark squares, and also the e3 square. So after knight to g3, we get knight to e5, and after takes, this is just a strong knight here. Now we get queen c7. Black has full control of this file. King to h2. The knight retreats to f5. f4 is played, and you know we have this file. The knight is nicely placed in the center. And after rook to c2, the white pieces thought, okay, I have one move here that saves me, and that is rook to c3. But the problem is, you might be thinking, okay, that's actually great. After this, maybe this, okay, then still this pawn is falling. But the smart thing which black here did is taking with the queen. And taking with the queen forces this queen trade. By the way, you cannot take here because, or you could, but then just this, right? Or, I mean, you can not do that, because then you would be losing material, right? So this forces this, and now he'll even lose another pawn, or he doesn't lose another pawn, but he loses a pawn, and now this pass pawn is really strong, and black is down. Oh, black is up a pawn, and white is down a pawn. So yeah, that's basically hopeless already. He pushes the pawn, and goes here and places his rook in front of this pawn, also attacking this at all times. And now a very nice move, pawn to g5, which will activate the king. And in this position already, the white piece is resigned because the king is just going to come in. And there's nothing to be done. There's nothing to be done. The knight doesn't have any more moves. It's just over already. I mean, okay, obviously here you could play on as the white pieces, especially on a lot of levels, but you know, the game ended here. So this is basically what you're supposed to do with the a takes b5 plan. You're supposed to check, okay, you're supposed to have a rook on c8. And obviously if the rook's on c8 and the queen is on c2, there's often a pin here, so it's actually really, really strong. But that doesn't have to be the case. The only real thing that has to be the case is that after a5, b6 is not possible. Because if b6 would be possible, the a5 pawn is going to fall. Yeah, it's probably going to fall. Sooner or later, it's going to fall. And that is why you have to play b5, b6 yourself. Okay, so that is basically the criteria if this plan would work or not. So let's get to the next one. And we're already at the position here. And this is basically the same position, very similar. I think it's the exact same position. And here we get rook to b1 as well. And then instead of knight f8 and then 96, we get knight to h5 here, trading off the dark square bishops, and now pawn to b4, a6, and a4. Same thing, right? Same thing. And now knight to b6. And that is a provocative move, because the best thing to do here is now to play a5 and just ignore this this minority attack. Change your plans, not go for the minority attack, and go knight to a5 and knight to c5. That is also a plan that white could potentially have, not going for the minority attack, but pushing like this and locking down the queen side. That's also a plan that white has, but that's executed very rarely, and I think it's not very strong. But that's actually the best thing to do here. What's not the best thing to do here is go b5 here, but that's what's happened. And now we get this, and c5. And that's the other way to respond to the minority attack if you don't play b5. So what happened here? You took, so the rook is now open. So we have a nice rook that's open, and c5 is aiming at the center here. That's very important. And this pawn here is defended, and we already threaten pawn to c4. So you basically force to take, and after queen takes, this b5 pawn is going to become the weakness. That is actually more of a weakness than a strength, and we're going to see this in this game. Rook to c1, knight goes back to f6, knight goes to d2, and we get a queen trade. And when the queen is traded, there's not much white has, right? White doesn't have anything, and the good thing for the black pieces is that you're just very active. You're just very active. The rook, the bishop's also going to become very active. The knights are nicely placed, and after rook is traded off, we get bishop to d7, which is a very good square. Why? Because you attack this b5 square. And now after knight to d4, we get rook to c8, rook c1, king to f8. And now the next mistake, or one of the very, very big mistakes of white here, is trading off the rooks. Trading off the rooks only helps the black pieces, because the black pieces have a target. They have a clear target to attack. This is not a target for white. This is not a target for white. But only black has this target. And slowly but surely, the king is going to come over to b6. And basically, this pawn is lost, because now you have two attackers, two defenders right now. You only need one more attacker for white, for black, and this would be over. Now, obviously, you have to be careful, because now the knight is going to come to e5, so we get prophylactic bishop to e8, knight e5, and knight to d7, and this trade only helps black. This trade only helps black. After king here, knight c5, this and this, bishop to knight e4, this forces the king back to e1, king to c5, this, and now knight to d6, and now the pawn is lost. Right? This is just what happened. Basically, what happened is the king that you opened up this file, you created this weakness, and then you just maneuvered your pieces, and at some point, it was just lost. Like, the pawn was just lost. Now the pawn was captured, And this is a hopeless endgame again. Here in this position, the white piece is resigned because the pawn is just gonna push, right? There's just nothing to be done. It's a pass pawn that is also on the outside of the board. So that is basically the second way to respond. The first way, c takes b5 and a5. The second way, a takes b5 and c5. And obviously in the last video, we discussed b5, playing b5 yourself. So if you haven't seen it, watch that right now. This is the third video of the series about the Carlsbad pawn structure. If you like the series, and if you like this video, hit the like and subscribe button right now. Before we wrap it up, I want to invite you to take your chess to the next level. And I offer one-on-one personal chess coaching for anyone who wants to improve fast. Whether you're just getting started at chess, you're a beginner, or you're an ambitious intermediate, and you want to get to 2000 on chess.com, 2000 plus on chess.com, doesn't matter. I offer you a personalized one-on-one chess coaching where we review games, go through your games, fix your weaknesses, and make sure you actually improve on this board game. If you're interested, click the first link in the pinned comment right now and book your first session today. I'd love to see you there, and I see you in the next video.